Hello, YouTube. Just hang on one second while we bring in Twitch here, and we will be on our way. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Stratosphere Lounge. I'm your host, Bill Whittle, and we are coming to you on YouTube and on Twitch. And I, after no thought whatsoever, realized I can start the YouTube stream first and then get this thing going. So here we are. Hope everybody's doing well, and you can see the place is it's a little bit of a, let's just say there's a lot of sawdust and shavings and things of that nature back there. I disassembled this enormous wooden platform that was built when the office was put in, and that was in 2014. A huge platform, which I was going to put over there on the table. I think we might have used it. In fact, we did use it when we did the first Stratosphere Lounge show from the new office in the alcove there. And everybody said, no, we want to go back to the webcam because the other one was too impersonal. So since then, it's been there and taking up floor space and just something to trip over. And it must weigh 800 pounds. So I cut it up into tiny little pieces and saved 4 of them for motion capture work, or, if I need steps or something like that. But the rest of it is on its way out. We're going to light that whole area back there and populate the the area. Yeah, the Gorn is exactly right. DGAX, I want to say DGAX 65 says the Gorn was injured in a workplace accident. He's recovering on his own planet, and papers will be served to me, I'm sure, on Monday morning for gross negligence in terms of, leaving things around that giant reptilians could fall on and hurt their indestructible selves with. Anyway, I hope everybody's doing well. Not a whole lot to talk about for the intro. So I imagine we'll get to questions earlier, just a couple things really. It's a little tough last night, to be perfectly honest with you. As virtually all of you know, I married a beautiful Russian woman who became a U.S. citizen last year, and she'd spent probably most of her life in Russia, in Sochi, on the Black Sea. And her mother, my mother-in-law, lives there, and her daughter used to live there. She's out of the country now, and I've tried to spend the last 18 months explaining to my wife that Sochi is not a military target, that there's nothing to worry about. They're 400 miles away from the front, and last night she comes in showing me video of burning oil tanks, because apparently the Ukrainians hit oil storage facility in Sochi, which is not making her happy, and that means I'm not happy either. There it is. She is, however, just every single day just getting more and more driving time. I did a speaking event yesterday, which I'll talk about just very briefly, and down in Ensenada, about a little over 2 hour drive. And on the way back, the Ukrainians, did I say the Iranians? I meant to say Ukrainians. She's just loving the freeway driving and getting better and better every day, and it's just so much fun to watch. So that's just really wonderful. So last time yesterday I did a speaking event that I haven't done one in quite a while. And this time I decided to crack open the ideas behind the fourth turning. I'm now about a quarter of the way through the book, and I haven't learned anything new in the last, 40 pages. I honestly don't know what, when I say that, it makes it sound like, oh, crummy, no good for nothing. It's a brilliant book. It's really very, very insightful. But it is just a slog. But I was kind of on fire yesterday. It was really fun because this, for those of you unfamiliar with it, we've talked about it on Stratosphere Lounge several times before. But a couple of authors, historians and sociologists, wrote a book called The Fourth Turning, and their argument is that that history moves in 80-year cycles, 80 to 100 years, 85 years, 80 years, somewhere in that general neighborhood. And they say that period of time, that 80-year period of time, has been known throughout recorded history, and the Romans had a term for it. They called it the saeculum, which is where the term secular comes from. And basically, the idea is, well, average life expectancy has increased fantastically, especially in the last century. The total human lifespan hasn't changed really much at all. The 120 is about the oldest, 120 plus, but the 40 has been pretty much the general lifespan. And I just gonna go through and reread all this stuff, write all this stuff down, and simplify it enormously. But to simplify it enormously, if you think about these 80-year cycles are marked by a crisis, a major crisis, existential crisis, and they're roughly every 80 years. And so, if you think about it, Declaration of Independence was 1776, but the Revolutionary War was fought mostly in the 1780s. So you add 80 years to the 1780s, and you get the 1860s, which was when the Civil War was. If you add 80 years to the 1860s, you get the 1940s, which is where World War II was. And if you add 80 years to the 1940s, you get the 2020s. So their authors are not claiming any supernatural reason for this. What they're claiming is that societies evolve in much the same way that humans' life evolves, not the word, societies progress the same way that the human life does. You've basically 4 seasons of the year. You've got spring, which is, growth, summer, which is maturation, autumn, which is the beginning of the decay, and then winter, which is the death of these things. And then it goes around again, again, and again. So I was talking about this, and the more I talked about it, the better I liked it, because it really does give you a great deal of hope, especially finding out that people 80 years ago and 160 years ago and 240 years ago were going through exactly what we're going through right now, which is the sense that, oh my God, everything's falling apart, everything we worked for, it's just coming apart, and this is the end of it. The authors of The Fourth Turning say that modern man usually thinks of time as linear, meaning, well, we started at the revolution and we're going to end up in the toilet or wherever the hell we're heading. But primitive people look at time as chaotic, where, oh, look, lightning strike or something happened and something else happened and nothing's connected to anything. There's no real sense of time in the way we understand it. They said the way to think about time is the way most philosophers and a lot of cultures have, and that's cyclically. So the theory, which makes a lot of sense, is that when there's a crisis, 1780s, 1860s, 1940s, 2020s, when there's a crisis, something so traumatic happens that it shakes up the entire society. And once the crisis is survived, all of that prior, brush has been burned off by the necessity of surviving this crisis, the Civil War, the Revolutionary War, World War II. And immediately after the crisis, those people who are young adults, especially in the spring and in the fall of their lives, feel this tremendous sense of unity and accomplishment and achievement, and everybody's optimistic, and they say things like that is where the difference between sexual roles is the greatest. And then as time goes on, you get me. So I'm a baby boomer, but I'm really late baby boom, and it's often defined as 1943 to 1960. Some people say 64, but I like 60. So I was born in 59, so if I'd been another year or two later, I would have technically probably been Gen X. But in any event, the theory is that while my mom and dad went through the crisis, I didn't go through the crisis. However, I was raised by people that went through the crisis, and I have first-person contact with people who went through the crisis. So your parents are molding you and forming you because they went through the crisis, and they're instilling those kind of values that got you through the crisis and into this kind of, this kind of thing. Guy says World War I, and you can find a lot of things like World War I, but World War I was not an existential threat to the United States. World War II was. So there have been a lot of, there's tons of wars that don't really fit this pattern. But generally speaking, what they're saying is that generational attitudes evolve on or progress on a predictable pattern. So I'm the first post-crisis generation. I wasn't raised in the crisis, but I was raised by people who did live through the crisis, and so all of those values got instilled in me. And in the post-crisis spring, in the period of growth, the kind of the high, anything is possible. That's what the 60s, the 50s, and 60s were. It's like we beat the Nazis, we beat the Japanese. Anything's possible. So, let's go to the moon, let's go to Mars, let's go to Saturn, let's have nuclear reactors in the desert, let's do all these things. By the time you get to Gen X, you're now 2 generations removed from the crisis, and the interaction between a father and mother and a child is very, very different between a grandmother or grandfather and that same child. So this second removed generation, they have contact with the generation that lived through the crisis, but as grandparents, and that's not nearly as day to day, and it's generally much softer. It's not, grandparents like being able to interact with their grandkids. That's a special relationship because they're not really responsible for raising them. That's their kids or their parents' problem. In any event, so that Gen X group gets further and further away from the crisis, and by the time you get to the millennials and Gen Z, you now have they have no experience with people who went through the crisis, essentially. And the point that these guys are making is where you are born relative to the crisis is going to determine what your generation is going to be like and what you generally are going to be like in the broadest possible terms. So like I said, I was born, in that super high period right after, somewhat after the crisis. So I grew up in a time of optimism. And then there was these spiritual awakenings happening every 80 years. There was one in the 70s, the 60s and 70s, and you think, well, that was hedonistic. It was. It wasn't a church revival like the previous ones, but it was we're going to find out about the age of Aquarius and all this, self-discovery stuff, and society starts to come apart. The third season is called The Unraveling, and that's what we've been living through. And I think we're really basically now heading into the crisis. So that, of course, begs the most important question, and that question is, well, what is this crisis going to be, and should we be looking for, bomb shelters and all the rest of it? I think I spent this last Stratosphere Lounge talking about possibility of nuclear war. I'm not going to talk about it again because I've said it a few times. I don't believe that is the coming crisis. I think nuclear weapons have made that kind of existential warfare obsolete. I just don't think it's going to be nuclear war. If it didn't happen during the Soviet era when they had direct orders to fire, then I just don't think that's going to be it. I'm not particularly worried about China either. I'm not really worried about any particular military crisis in the next 10 or 15 years because we've been spending $600 billion a year for 30 years preparing for this next crisis. I don't think it's coming from there. So I thought about it, and if it turns out this theory is true, then we need to kind of guess what that next crisis is going to be. And my prediction is that the coming crisis will be the crisis where American cities become unlivable. That the destruction of the American city is the coming crisis. It's unavoidable. You can't slowly work your way out of this catastrophe that they've created. It's not something you're going to be able to vote your way out of and make San Francisco's, Fisherman's Wharf habitable again through electing Republicans to the city council. It's just not going to happen that way. It's going to burn, And that's what happens during the crisis. There's good news and bad news in that. The good news is, generally speaking, most of us are not city people, and we certainly have friends who are not city people. And so I don't think that the particular violence or the destruction is going to affect us directly. But the reason I think it's going to be an existential crisis is because half of the country is urban, actually slightly more than half is urban. And that means that this urban population that has been made into essentially people who are unemployed and unemployable. They're living in the cities, and all the entitlement programs and all of the racial hatred that's stoked and all the rest of this stuff has turned them into functionally, the little walking balls of fury without any competence or skill set. And when these cities start to really fall apart, they're going to go out looking for a place to eat. And that means that Red America is going to have to start dealing with I don't mean like an influx of city people. I mean a tidal wave of it. That's what I think is the kind of thing that would be massive enough to count as one of these existential crises. Because there's no guarantee these guys are right. Could just be coincidence. Could just be artful selection of data. But it's an interesting idea. And what they're essentially saying is that this same cycle of crisis, optimism, growth, stability, maturity, unraveling, and then decay and essentially collapse makes sense, because that's how animals behave. All animals behave that way. Put a lot of food down, you're going to get fat rabbits and fat dogs and fat cats and going to get lots and lots of bacteria, and you can't be that disconnected from reality for 80 years until reality decides to knock on the door again. That's what I think is going to happen. When I look at how fast the cities are going in San Francisco, again, arguably the most beautiful city in America, maybe in the world, all of the things that we think of when we think of San Francisco just aren't there anymore. Fisherman's Wharf is closed. The market area there is closed. The stores are closed because the political leadership is so far away from reality, and the electorate also is so far away from crisis and reality that they've elected people that make them feel good about how generous they are with other people's money. And now that appeal to this highly activated base has gotten to the point where you could be the most progressive guy in the world. You could be a guy who has a bookstore that does nothing but sell Marxist tracts. It's all you do. You're as left wing as you get. But if you're living in a city and you vote that way, and then people just start coming into your bookstore and just walking out with the cash that's in the cash register and burning those books because nobody's going to take them out and read them. It's garbage. But it's true for all of these things. You look at these Targets, just a Target, Target store. That name is going to mean something pretty different pretty soon, I think. People just walk in and they just put in 2 shopping carts worth of the most expensive stuff they find, and they just go straight out the door, and they dare you to do something about it. When the management in places like California calls and says, "My God, we're being robbed," the police say, "There's nothing we can do about it." What do you mean there's nothing you can do about it? Well, we've been told by the city authorities that we cannot arrest people who are shoplifting, and if we do, we'll get fired, and if we do, they won't be prosecuted anyway. So that's the new political base for the left, is the criminals, the criminally insane, and the freakiest of the freaks. That's who they're going to continue to play to. And that's going to take them further and further away from the fundamental reality, and this schism's going to get wider. And then the crisis is going to happen, and the crisis will determine whose political philosophy is correct. Because I think half the country, population-wise, in terms of total area, I bet it's not 5%, but population-wise, it's going to be half the country. Lady Hawk MB says 9,000 single men crossed over at Eagle Pass today. That's just one location on the border. 9,000. So, we have an entirely new set of problems we're going to have to deal with, and we're going to have to deal with them in an entirely new set of ways. Last crisis, we needed aircraft carriers and battleships and a lot of merchant ships. We needed to build weapons, tanks. We needed armies of guys with guns. We needed lots and lots of airplanes, and needed lots and lots of ships. We're not going to need any of those things this time, I don't think. We are going to... People say, well, no one could ever invade America. America's being invaded right now. 9,000 people invaded America just in one location. Today, we're going to have to deal with that. That's what I think the crisis is going to be, is that this toxic poison from the cities and these Democratic-run areas are going to just spill out as those things collapse, and that poison is going to just spread into the healthy part of America. And the poison is attitudes. It's attitudes. It's the sense of entitlement. It's these people are... All of these urban problems are all related. The educational system is just appalling. They can't name 3 other countries. We're at the place now where we have half of the population, at least half of the upcoming population generations, incapable, not only unwilling, incapable of doing any kind of meaningful work. And that incapacity doesn't mean that they're too stupid to do it. It just means, just to kind of put a button on this, I think you could make the case that the vast majority of Gen Z cannot read. And when I say that they can't read, I'm not saying that they're not capable of looking at letters on a screen and interpreting what that means, although we're rapidly losing that ability too, because we're dealing with emojis now. We're gonna have 6 essential words in the emoji land that we're heading into, or that we would have been heading into, if it's not going to collapse under its own stupidity. But when I say that Gen Z can't read, I mean they do not have the... I'm generalizing, but generally speaking, they don't have the attention span or the focus or the desire to sit down and read a book. Sitting down and reading a book it's kind of work. So it does wonders for what your brain is able to do, and so we've got more and more people every day domestically who are less and less educated, more and more entitled. You would think that, ideally, if you're less educated and less capable, you'd at least be self-aware enough to realize that you're going to be at the bottom of the economic ladder for the duration. So you better either get some night classes or make sure your kids get an education. That's how it's been for 3/4 of this seculum. But now we're at the point where not only don't they care that they're not educated, they fully expect to have things done for them, including providing safe spaces, and if they need an answer, they'll just Google it, as they like to say. And when they're told you guys are being ripped off, it's kind of like, okay, boomer, that was true then, but this is a whole new time. You're all part of this, old generations, and we're the first generation is going to do everything right, which is what every single generation in human history has thought. So that's bad news. Good news is, and what I closed with during the speech is, this unraveling that we're seeing and this impending collapse is not the end of the republic. It's the end of this cycle of the republic, and that people felt this prior to the Civil War, for example. In the 1850s, the country was just in a state of absolute perpetual anxiety and near hysteria because they knew that this Civil War was coming. They just didn't know exactly when, but they knew it. But the point is, we got through it. And the point that these authors are making is you have to have this cycle to advance. If you don't, then all of this detritus just builds up and builds up until everything's just choked off. You have to have this fire come through to cut this dead bush away and to return a lot of those fertilizers and nutrients to the soil. So the bad news is it's going to get worse, but we all knew that. The good news is it's not the end of the Republic. It's just the end of this cycle of the Republic. And when we get through the other end of the crisis, we will be back where we were in the 50s and 60s in terms of our attitudes and our optimism and our cohesiveness, patriotism, all those things. They're all going to come back because they're going to have to. And we will be further along in terms of the progress of the human spirit. And then we'll have another great 40 years, and somewhere around the year 50 or 60, it's going to start to loosen up a little bit and get a little worrisome. And then in the years 60 to 80 years after this next crisis is over, those people are going to start feeling like everything's going to hell, and there they're going. So Eric Blake wants to know what's the response to them spilling out. I don't know. That's why it's going to be a crisis. I don't know what the solution to these things. I don't know what we're going to do with the millions and millions of people that have come here just in the last 2 years. I don't know what we're going to do with them. I suspect that, well, one of the qualities of the crisis is that all of these kind of luxury beliefs kind of go away, luxury beliefs like you can just keep printing money, or everybody getting a guaranteed minimum wage, and all of these other magical beliefs where things just happen because things have been working so well for so long. It just, Now we're gonna be in some rough waters. But what I closed the speech with yesterday on is, I'll just kind of close with you guys too. It's like, yes, there's a storm coming, but this ship of ours has been through at least 3 of these and come out better on the other side. And it looks to me like this particular crisis will not be as bad as the last one, and certainly not as bad as the one before that. The Civil War was just a catastrophe. But after the Civil War was over, we made great strides. By the time we got to the next crisis, we were a fully industrialized country, and we had a lot of unity and all the rest of it. So BLD 1133 said Trump today said he was sending them all home. That's the correct answer, but achieving it is something different. And that's, I guess, why it is. I ended by talking about this idea of opening up a barn or an old storage unit or something, and there's a rusting away Model T, or a 1930s or Roadster or something, just an orange hunk of iron, and you put that on the back of a flatbed truck, and you pay the owner $20 to haul it away, and you get to the garage at home, and then you just lovingly and slowly start taking all the rust off. You get the original plans. The rubber is just completely garbage, so you have to get new tires made to match all of those, and you got to rewire the thing and so on, and you got to do all of those things. And then if you are a kind of person that restores automobiles, you can then take that rusted out, beat up, decrepit looking Model T and make it look like it came out of the factory this morning. But this Model T will have GPS in it and satellite radio, and if you choose. I was thinking about this in terms of, it's actually a very interesting thought. So we talked several shows ago about Glacier Girl. Glacier Girl is a P-38. A P-38, for those of you who not watched a ton of these shows, was a World War II fighter aircraft, twin-engine fighter aircraft, extremely distinctive. Really the only two-engine fighter of the war that America had. In fact, the only twin-engine fighter in the war that was any good at all. And it was very good. So they made a bunch of these in the 1940s, and they came out of the factories brand spanking new, and they went to the Eastern Theater, the Pacific Theater, and they went to the European Theater. One of them, either during the war or shortly after, made an emergency landing, I want to say in Greenland. It might have been Iceland, but I think it was Greenland. And after the plane landed, the pilot presumably got out and he was rescued. They just left the plane out there. It's out in the middle of a field in the middle of nowhere. No way to get it out of there even if they wanted to. So this P-38 sits out there in the weather for years and years and years. And then eventually this glacier begins to just creep over where this thing is. And it's buried under just feet of ice for, I don't know, 60 years, something. They know what's in there. These guys go looking for it. They know that the P-38 went down somewhere and it wasn't recovered, so they go looking for this thing and they find it. And what they find is a P-38 that has been pretty much utterly smashed down by the weight of the ice. The engine blocks are intact and stuff. But it's a P-38, except that it's completely crushed. So here's the question. What actually happened is they took the P-38 back to a hangar and had to remake essentially all of the aircraft. Aircraft usually are riveted sheet aluminum. And so if you've got the original Glacier Girl, you can very meticulously pull apart the rivets on every one of those pieces of aluminum skin and make a duplicate with the rivet holes in the same place, same for all the ribs and the longerons and all the rest of it. So here's the question that's interesting. Glacier Girl started out as a brand new P-38. Then it became rusted junk. And then it was rebuilt into a brand new P-38. Looks like it was made today. So the question is, this is really the interesting question. So this is an analogy for America, post-crisis America. So the question with Glacier Girl is the airplane now that is flying around called Glacier Girl, is it the same P-38 that landed in Iceland? Is it the same one? Well, that's kind of hard to say, isn't it? Because I don't think there's very, very little of the stuff that was actually there that they recovered is on the modern airplane, because most of it is just crunched. So is it actually the same airplane that it was when it landed? It is not. It's not the same airplane. The parts are completely different. So here's the point. If that original P-38 had been named Peggy 3, and they find it and dig it up and they call it Glacier Girl, they rebuild it. Is Glacier Girl the same airplane as Peggy 3? No. It is not Peggy 3. But you know what it is? It's a P-38. That's what it is. Glacier Girl is a P-38. Even though there's no original, well, essentially, for the sake of the argument, there are no P-38 parts in it. It is a P-38. It is absolutely identical to a P-38. So that's the kind of question we need to be asking ourselves. Is it, well, will it be America? Well, it'll be different post-crisis. Yeah, it'll be very different. But will it still be America? Well, the plan will be there. The pattern will be there. So yes, the answer is yes. Glacier Girl is not the airplane it was when it crashed. Nope, nothing you see on this flying P-38 was buried under ice, but it is a P-38. There's no question about that. If you look at that, that is a P-38 Lightning. No question. Eric Blake says, Glacier Girl A. Well played, sir. Yeah. So the same argument actually is true for the human body, by the way, or any living organism. Essentially, virtually, I guess their bone is some kind of an exception, but basically, all of Phil beat me to it in the comments section. Yeah, essentially everything that you are now, you're not walking, the cells that you're walking around with right now are not the cells that you had when you were a child or a teenager, not the same cells you had 5-10 years ago. They've all been replaced. So none of these are, original parts. So am I the same person I was when I was 17? Well, yes and no. No, in terms of no, the parts are pretty much different. All those cells that used to make up Bill Whittle are long gone. But yes, because the pattern and the plan and the diagram is the same. And so that's what I think is going to happen to America. It's going to change and it's going to be the same. But it will be restored, and it will be restored to its original condition and better. I really believe it. I've come to really believe it. Eric says, moral of the Glacier Girl story is that nothing is irreparable. That's right. All of the damage to these institutions, which if you think of time linearly, as we usually do, and as I did prior to getting hold of this book, which was recommended to me by the members, somebody, one of the Strata Loungers, it's a whole different feeling, to go from this is the end of the Republic, which is what I've been feeling for the last, certainly since 2020, to this is the end of this cycle of the Republic. And that this ship has been through the storms before. And she got us through every time. She's going to get us through again, too. And every time you come out of it, you're further along. So, I just find that cause for optimism. And what's especially interesting about this is the part that's going to shake the foundations. The actual heroes of the next crisis are Gen Z. They're going to be the ones that are going to do the actual heavy lifting. They're going to be the ones that carry the millennials, and Gen Z will be the ones that carry most of the weight in terms of getting us through this next crisis. And you can look at them and say, well, there's no way they can handle that. But that's what they said about the generation in 1850. It's what they said about the generation in 1760. It's what they've been saying in the generation in 1930. They've been saying the 20s, the Roaring 20s. Everybody thought America was done. We just keep coming back. So I'm actually greatly encouraged by this, and hopefully you will be too. So I'm going to be doing an extension of this on the 30th of September. I'm going to be down in San Diego, where they're having their California Republican Convention. Donald Trump's going to be there. I'm not going to be speaking at that group. There's another group that's not connected with that group, and I'm going to be speaking there to kind of I get the overflow crowd. But I did this dog and pony show yesterday, and people were leapt to their feet applauding. Because it's real hope. It's not, hey, everything's going to be okay. It's just, no, there's good reason to believe that this is just us, not just us, but this is us heading into a hurricane. But we've taken this ship through hurricanes before. Anyway, that's that. How do I believe it'll be restored? See, here's the thing. Republic Stud asked that on YouTube. How do I think it's going to be restored? I don't know yet. I don't know. I don't know if there will be cities as we understand them after this crisis, if I'm right about it being the cities, and I think I am right. I don't know if they'll be there anymore. And you can say, well, that's kind of impossible, but, if you look at the Civil War, and if you told somebody in the years after the Civil War that there aren't going to be any more horse-drawn carriages anymore, they'd look at you like, well, you're nuts. There's no way you can run a society without horses pulling carts. It's just not possible. They couldn't tell what it was going to be, but it was going to be something. So I don't really know. I don't really know how we're going to fight this thing. It's going to be. I don't think it's going to feel like a war, like a shooting war. I think there'll be a fair amount of violence, mind you, but I don't think that's going to really touch most of us. I think it's going to be more of a moral simplification. And what I mean by that is people who are well-fed can afford to set up rescue centers for fluffy bunnies. And I'm not mocking that. I think it's wonderful. But it's a luxury belief. It's a luxury institution. And we have a lot of luxury beliefs now in our society that we cannot imagine doing without, but we can do without them. Reason I brought up the bunnies is because I think most of this actual angst, I think most of the actual crisis, because the societal crisis is just a crisis of hundreds of millions of individuals because there is no such thing as society, it's just individuals. I think the crisis is going to be the psychological pain of having to be much tougher than we were before. Much tougher. I think we're going to be forced by circumstances to do away with a lot of sentimentality that we are very attached to, and that in most cases is highly noble. I'm not saying we're going to start eating cats and dogs. I am saying that this idea of, just as one example, you've got a dog and you spend $20,000 on dog toys and tiaras for the little dog, and all of that stuff. That's a luxury belief. We're gonna have to toughen up. We're going to see some things that we're not going to like, and we're going to have to make some choices that we're not going to like, and it's not going to feel good, and we're just going to have to man up about it. That's all there is to it. Just going to have to just plain say, okay, well, yes, it's upsetting, but now it's time to man up about this stuff. Does this hurt? Yes, it does. Is it necessary? It is. Well, then let's just get the goddamn thing over with as quickly and as painlessly as possible, and that's what I think we're heading for. Anyway, that's that. So let's do some questions, and we'll see what we got here. Today, as we record this, September 21st, the autumnal equinox, one of 4 clearly delineated astronomical timepieces. Uptick Mix says, I fear your comments and those of the likes of the Blaze are fentanyl to terminal culture. Will feel better, but the U.S. and its Constitution will finally be executed by its enemies. Well, they said the Constitution of the United States was executed by Lincoln, shutting down opposition newspapers in the North. That's what they said then. A lot of people were saying the Constitution was shredded when they interred all the Japanese people. A lot of people said that you're going to have to ditch the Constitution in order to fight World War II, because we can't have those kind of restraints on us. We need to be, fully. And I'm just saying that because I don't think it's true. I think it's, but we'll see. I could be completely wrong about this. Before I forget, I saw one go strolling by. There it is. Piraka the Rapper for a super chat. Thank you. I just finished filming my short movie, The Tale of Silver. Your show really helped me think out the tech to make it. Thank you. Well, thank you very much for that, Piraka, and I'm looking forward to seeing whatever you can show us. That's very kind. I am gonna just one quick detour before we get to the questions. The subject of this interview show, I still don't have a date set because, as I've said several times, when we're dealing with just generally when you're dealing with celebrities, especially in the beginning, and essentially in a one-man show, I want everything in place. So the thing that was not yet in place was, how do I record John's video or Gary Sinise's or anybody else's video? How do I record that remotely? And a number of suggestions were there, and I did a lot of looking into it and stuff, and it had to be easy. I can't very well ask somebody like John or Gary to spend an hour and a half installing and testing software. It's got to be simple, but it's got to be as high quality as possible. I did some tests, and I found something called Riverside, which is an app, and it's also a website. And basically what Riverside does is it streams both cameras, my camera and the other person's camera, streams them to the cloud, and does it in high resolution. So it's the communication between the two of us may be a little rough, but there is a high quality version stored on the local drive. I think that's how it works actually. And then the software goes and gets that file off of that person's hard drive, so they don't have to touch it. They just don't touch it. I'll look into Squadcast. I didn't even hear about that user who. But it seemed like it was working really well. I did a couple of tests, and then I tested it with Natasha, And it turns out that it only works with Chrome or Edge, which is, got a good chance of that. But then again, I don't want people, you have to install Chrome. It's got to make this as painless as possible. So I'm still just hammering out the last of those things. But the thing I just wanted to mention briefly was this name thing, because I've been back and forth on the name on this, and every week I tell you, no, I've got it all sorted out. I'm actually thinking that in terms of, so I'm thinking about how these conversations are going to go. I'm thinking about searching, search engines. I was surprised. Jeremy Bourne told me that, wasn't surprised to know that the number one search engine is Google, but I was surprised to know that the number two search engine on the planet is YouTube. Obviously trying to get some new people, and I think I'm thinking about calling the show "How to Tell a Story." That's what I think I might call it. How to Tell a Story with Bill Whittle. And that way I can look at anything I want to. I can look at archetypes. I can look at character plots. I can have Dick Rutan come in and talk about flying fast fact missions over Vietnam, because that's a story. And we can find out what's interesting about that story. Thank you very much, Lisa McGraw, with a $20 super chat, nothing attached. Just being kind. Thank you. So I think there's to be a fair amount of searching for how to tell a story. Because ultimately, when I went through the script and the notes for Midnight Cowboy, so much of what I did there was really digging into the screenplay. So that's the name of the show, du jour. So there you go. Yep. So. Eric suggested Bill Whittle storytellers. I think that there is a fair amount of searching on how to tell a story. I think most people who are looking for tutorials on how to make movies or write a book or any of that stuff, right now that's what we're going with. Anyway, that's the detour. So let's get back into the swing of things here. Okay, here we go. I have to log myself in here. All right, here we go. Members. Come on. Member forum. Funny thing happened on the way to the forum. I wasn't in that show, but I was a stage manager for it. It was fun. It was a fun play, actually. Stratosphere Launch questions and more. And 921 Stratosphere Launch questions, politics. Here we go. Dun 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 dun. Okay, hang on a second. Not many, actually. Again, we have a wall of text from Eric Blake here. God bless his soul. So I'm going to skip the introduction. Last week you made the claim that we've heard from Ben and Clavin and the like that if DeSantis waited to run until finishing his second term, there'd have been a gap, his moment would have faded, etc. Now, I don't blame any of you for thinking this, as you're not Florida voters, or in Ben's case, haven't been until an hour ago. So let me give the facts on the ground. Ron began his current campaign a matter of months after starting his second term. This, incidentally, is why I and many others are pissed at him, but I digress. Eric is a Florida resident, if you haven't picked that up yet. In other words, if he had waited, any gap would have been minimal. The gap I'm talking about is the gap between when he leaves office in 2026 and the presidential election of 2028. And lest we forget, Governor Reagan's second term in California ended with 74, 2 years before 76. So he didn't fade. He didn't in the 4 years afterwards either. It's a good point. Excellent point. In the end, Bill, I say the whole his moment is now and it'll fade if he waits is a siren song, and by listening to it, Ron's frankly damaged himself, perhaps irreparably. He was the MAGA golden boy, the heir apparent to Trump. Now he's alienated that base with his hubris. So, Bill, am I missing something? No, I think you're got it. The question is, what will DeSantis do between 26 and 28? And of course, will there be anybody between now and then? That's a pretty long time. Who's going to, be shinier? But just playing the Ron DeSantis for president in 28 scenario, he's going to have to do something during 27 and through 28. He's got to stay in the limelight. I think he should run for senator or something like that. That'd be my guess. But you could also argue that's a step down for a governor because the by far, the U.S. presidents have come much more likely to be a governor than a senator and more likely to be a senator than a member of the House of Representatives. He's going to have to do something. Now, Ronald Reagan had a big advantage over Ron DeSantis, and that is that Reagan, politics was his second occupation. Reagan was known across the country as a movie star and had been for 2 decades. I don't remember when. I'm virtually positive that Reagan's work touring the country for GE was prior to him becoming elected governor of California. It must have been. So he's got to stay in the loop. He's got to be seen, and and he can't just be commenting from the sidelines. He's got to have some kind of movement. Now, that's going to be the challenge, but I don't think that the events of 2024 campaign have irreparably hurt him, but I don't think he handled them very well. When you've got, this will be Donald Trump's last campaign. I think we all can agree on that, one way or another. I'm not saying if he's elected, I'm not saying he won't run again, but I just don't see him having another campaign in him 4 years from now if he doesn't get elected. So somebody's going to have to fill that vacuum, and Ron DeSantis is the primary choice. I think it was a mistake to run against Trump because there is no running against Trump. It's just, there isn't. It's just not in the. He's leading by more than 50 points. That's his lead. And if it were me, I wouldn't. I don't see any win there. If I'm going to go into that race against somebody with that kind of lead, it'd be kind of like me challenging Barack Obama. If I was a Democrat and I wanted to challenge Obama and primary Obama in 2012, that's an uphill fight. I think he would have been better to sit it out because I don't think he ever had a chance of pulling it off. Now, there's been some acrimony between Trump and DeSantis, obviously, and a little bit of name calling. I'm not an acute judge of this, but I haven't seen anything that would appear to be fatally divisive, unforgivable. But this is going to be Trump's election in 2024. And the key statistic is that Republicans there's only been 2 years in the 21st century, 2 individual years, non-consecutive years, by the way, when more people called themselves Republicans than Democrats. Only happened twice in the 21st century so far. And I think once we were up +2 and then another time like +3, something like that. Last number I heard was we were up +6. There we go. Okay, something going on here, you're saying? there's a lot of action, a lot of heat in the comment section that I wasn't really keeping up with, but that's fine too. That's why the membership here is so eclectic and electric. When you say electric guitar, did you mean eclectic guitar? That's a joke for one person. One person will get that reference. Anyway, so that's that. Ian Nolan. Bill, you said many times before that the enemy doesn't get to make the same sneak attack twice, and there's some truth to that. Maybe the ball we should be keeping our eye on isn't mail-in ballots or voting machine shenanigans, but all of the illegal aliens that are being dispersed throughout the country and how they could interfere with an election process. Thoughts? Yes. I'm not saying that that is it, but I'm saying that's the kind of thinking we need to be doing. 9/11 succeeded because, and it's commonly, in fact, it's universally spoken as a put down when you say that generals are always preparing to fight the last war. But honestly, what else would you expect them to do? They're not science fiction writers, and you've got a budget. I used to think, and when that term is used that way, everybody's preparing to fight the last war. So we've got all these bombers and all these submarines and aircraft carriers and all that other stuff, but we're never going to be looking at another fleet like that. We're never going to see the Japanese Kurobutai? The Japanese mobile force, 8 carrier decks. We're never going to face that threat. China's not even remotely capable of challenging us on the ocean. So are we spending all of our money preparing to fight the last war? Here's how I prefer to think of it. I think of it not so much as we don't have the vision to see what's going on in the future. We don't know what's going on in the future. The way I like to think of it is that generals and politicians are trying to plug the hole that the last war came through. That's probably the best way to think about it. They're trying to plug the hole. So we got blindsided by a sneak attack from carrier-based aviation and a very powerful surface navy. And so we made sure that wasn't going to happen again. We had the Cold War. We developed lethally retaliatory weapons that are undetectable. I'm not saying they're all undetectable, but certainly we have enough boomers to be able to get the point across if somebody decided to launch a nuclear attack on this country, so they won't launch a nuclear attack. I mean, one surviving ballistic missile sub, there's no gain possible. There's no calculation possible that's worth that price. There isn't any. So we've plugged the hole that that led to our last big conflict in World War II. We were underarmed. I don't know if many people know this, but at the time of Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941, day that will live in infamy, the United States' Army, if you look at its equipment and its number of tanks and all the rest of it, we weren't first in the world, we weren't second, we were 16th. We were behind Portugal in terms of our military preparedness on December 8th of 1941. And by the time the war was over, we had 33 carriers in and around Tokyo Bay. So we adjust quickly, and when we're really fully in a crisis, we not only adjust quickly, we adjust astonishingly well. So to answer your question, yes. If I was trying to look forward, I would say that this invasion of illegal aliens that is being it's not just being allowed by this White House, it's being promoted by the White House. When the White House says to the Border Patrol, it's one thing to say to the Border Patrol, we're not going to give you any more resources, we're not going to, but when you give them orders, which by the way have to be executive orders, which are just dictatorship, that's one of the things that's going to have to burn in this next cycle. But when you tell them, you you are not allowed to go out and do your job. You can't even stop the people that we were stopping before. You have to let them through. And if you do try to stop them, you'll be fired. Then there's something going on. There's something going on. And clearly, now you run into the problem of, is there somebody playing 4D chess, or is it really just as simple and as banal and as low and corrupt and stupid as it appears to be? In other words, has somebody got some gigantic master plan here, or is it something as simple as the Democrats saying, the only people that we can get to vote for us now, the only way we can cheat our way into power is to flood the zone, basically, and just have enough physical bodies show up because their policies continue to get more and more and more bizarre and otherworldly. So yes, as I know you wrote the question well before the show, but 9,000 males, young males, fighting men, cross the border in one location in one day. That's not in Texas in a month. That's one point along the border in one day. And you do have to ask yourself why they're not bringing their families with them. Certainly you wouldn't want to bring your wife and kid with you if it was a great deal of hardship, but essentially all the hardship has been removed now. You don't even have to trek through the desert anymore. You just walk across the line. And so this very well could be the infiltration of hundreds of thousands, if not millions of fighting-aged males. But I will tell you one thing. There's no way for me to believe allowing this many illegal immigrants into the country could be part of the plan, and undoubtedly is part of their plan. But the idea that each one of these immigrants has got a little, dossier on what they're supposed to do, when they get here for the big uprising, I don't believe that. I think somebody has a very good idea what this is going to eventually lead to, but I don't think they're commandos, But we'll see. I really do think we're just going to have to get tougher about these things. We're really just going to have to get tougher about it. And if we're expecting this to be a course correction, I think we're well past that point now. I really think it's like, okay, we've hit the rocks, into the lifeboats, row ashore, build a new dockyard, and then assemble the ship that we just got out of, or at least from the original plans, put everything that was in there before that worked, and then add a couple of groovy little additions, but basically you keep the design that's working so well. So I don't know, but I think you're right, Ian. I think these are the kind of things that we're going to be dealing with quickly. CP Tome says everyone needs to get a plan to turn from an R to a K soon. Yeah, the days of R are limited. We're not going to open up the whole RK thing again, but there are two essential survival strategies. One is R strategy, to produce as many offsprings as possible, and the K strategy, which is to produce the highest quality offspring possible. And the Ks have gotten sentimental, and so the Rs have started. I say Rs, I'm talking about their ideas. I'm talking mimetically now. Their ideas are breeding out of control, and the Ks have just been sitting around fat and lazy, and it's going to be time for something to change, I think. Okay, second time asking from Chris Taylor. Last time you got so upset at the first sentence you didn't even manage to get to the question. Seems so unlike me. The Biden junta just put a price on on all overseas Americans' heads by paying around $6 billion for 5 U.S. hostage prisoners. Then they waited several days after doing so to announce it, only to inform the world that we are spending billions of our tax dollars to a member of the axis of evil on September 11th. Are the people who decided to announce this on 9/11 enemy agents celebrating their victory, or just useful idiots laughing at doing something the conservative normies will hate? Or is there still some possible excuse that could be made for them that it was incompetence or ignorance of the date's significance or such? No, there's no argument for that. There's clearly no argument for that. Is there any other way to interpret this but I hate you message to normal patriotic Americans? Yes, this is a really great question, Chris. I think a lot of what we're seeing now. I think the transgender movement is a large part of this. I think these look. The question is, how far do you want to go with this? I used to think that this idea that that a group of elitists, we're pulling strings in the world. I just thought that's just as nutty as it gets. The world is much more complicated than that. And then we saw things with COVID, and we saw things with the election, and there are no other alternatives that you can use other than something coordinated is going on at a very high level. And you get the World Economic Forum and these DEI scores and BlackRock, going to fund you if you have a drag event for elementary school, you get a better rate on your $60 million loan, that kind of thing. So something's going on. Now, how far do you walk that? Are there 8 people that sit in a wood-paneled room at the bottom of a volcano someplace with chairs that, dump them into a pool of, lava, or sharks with frickin' laser beams on their heads? I mean, how far does that thing go? George Carlin, there's a clip of Carlin where, and this is at least 30 years old, it might be more. Somebody said Carlin was on a talk show, and the host said there is no concerted voter fraud. There's no evidence for any of this. Again, this has got to be, I would say, at least the 90s and maybe earlier. And Carlin said, you don't need it. He said, all of these people have the same objectives. They all went to the same colleges. They have the same friends. They go to the same clubs. They have the same desires. They drive the same cars. They go to the same places on vacations. They're all part of the same fraternities. There doesn't have to be a guy in a basement with a little Morse code thing, sending out the signal for the operatives. It's a secret handshake, is what it is. And and you think, well, come on, Bill, that can't be true. And then you find out about things like Skull and Bones, and you find out about things like Bohemian Grove, which is real, which is real. Bohemian Grove is real. The richest, most powerful men in the country get together up in, where is it? I think it's in Northern California. And they all check in, and they're there for a week. And the first thing they do on their first day is essentially take all their clothes off, start peeing on trees like real men, put their clothes and all this other stuff into this fire and burn it. It's the burning of the troubles, Everything that's on your mind, we're just going to set fire to it, and for the next week, we're just going to be a bunch of Vikings out here, and we're going to sit here and we're going to eat a bologna sandwich, and we're going to determine what the world's going to do next. Well, that's real. That actually happens. That happens every year. There's a meeting in Davos every year. There's a meeting in, where is it? It's not Sundance, but it's that kind of a place. There's a resort in America where all the tech giants get together and meet for a day or two every year. What are they talking about? They don't tell us. And this is real. So, where does a rational, skeptical person go? I don't think there's really anywhere else to go. So then you just have to start asking yourself, what do they want? What do they want? Well, they want Democrats to get elected. That's not the answer. They want Democrats to get elected. Okay. For why? They don't. The people that are controlling let's just take concrete examples, because talking about this makes me feel like I'm crazy. And I have to remind myself that these opinions are based on evidence. So let's look at the evidence. In the 2020 election, Hunter Biden's laptop surfaced, which had photographic evidence, prima facie, first person, fingerprints on the keys evidence that not just that Hunter Biden was completely corrupt, but that Joe Biden was getting a regular take. He's wetting his beak on transactions that used his position of power as vice president in exchange for money, which went to his son, but which he also took, which came to millions of dollars. There's no question about that. Okay, so in 2020, that information was suppressed. If you talked about it on Twitter, you'd have your account shut down. If you talked about it on YouTube, it'd be pulled down. We'll leave the whole COVID-19 aside, but it's the same kind of thing. It was suppressed. And the FBI came up with the story and said, oh, it's misinformation. But we know that they know. And we know that the tech people know that this was real. So this is just like one step at a time here. So clearly, now people argue maybe it didn't affect the election. I seem to remember hearing something like 70 or 80% of the Democrats who voted for Biden, when they were asked afterwards if this would have changed their vote, they said, well, hell yes, it would have changed my vote. So let's say that this giant tech industry and a coalition of big money and all the rest of this influence wants Joe Biden to be president. It's not because they like Joe Biden, and it's not because they run around with a big D Democrat shirt on their pasty little bodies all the time while they're barbecuing things. If they want Democrats elected, it's because the Democrats will further their agenda. They're not interested in politics. They're only interested in politics to the degree that they want to influence politics to make their agenda more attainable for them. I don't know what that agenda is. I have a couple of just general guesses. But I think the evidence for this so far, where these little steps we're taking, is overwhelming. Okay? Overwhelming. And so what do they get out of this? And one of the things I think they're going to get, I've seen enough of heard enough of the story, seen enough of the evidence, and heard enough of the case to have the broad outlines of it. I mean, the broadest outlines of it. I don't know any of the specifics, so it's hard for me to talk about it because I don't have that kind of granularity on the information. But essentially, the argument is that if you elect politicians who keep spending money at the rate that we're spending money, and you come up with a number that is utterly unimaginable, 35, that was probably closer to $40 trillion deficit now, that money cannot be repaid. It will never be repaid. It's just never, ever, ever going to happen. And that has been true since the deficit got into double digits. Once it got to $10 trillion, forget it. Okay, so what's happening? Well, people who really dig into this say it's in the interests of these big money concerns to have a great reset. That they win by this because if you zero all of the accounts, first of all, they control the accounts so they can set how many zeros they want. There's no question they're trying to get rid of cash. There's no question they're trying to get rid of any sort of transactions that don't go through the web that they can't control. I personally believe that the entire electric car movement is a halfway house to get rid of cars completely. I think in my mind, there's no question about all that. And of course, hovering over all of this is the climate change threat, which has fully half, if not more, of the country completely terrified that this is the end of the world. So, where does that go? It's hard to put yourself in their position. It's hard to imagine what their end goals are, because when you look at somebody like Klaus Schwab and that guy, what's his name? Is it Yaron? The pencil neck egghead who's telling us that the greatest thing that humans will do will be to make ourselves extinct by creating these magical silicon creatures. That guy. They're so clearly psychopathic and sociopathic that you can't really imagine what they want. But I would suspect what they want is they want a world that is much more ordered and much less messy and random. And that means a couple things. It means reducing the population, and it especially means getting rid of the American middle class, because the American middle class owns a lot of property. The American middle class lives damn near as well as they do, and that bothers the hell out of them. And how can you say that, Bill? Look, if you are a middle class person and you own your own house or even rent a house, you are not that different than how Klaus Schwab lives. He's got more of everything, but you've got air conditioning, you've got Novocaine, and you've got, a car, and you fly in jets, and you go around the world. You can do all of those things if you're middle class American. This pisses them off. Yeah, Yuval, that guy, he's a piece of work. So what do they want? I think that they want a much smaller population. I know that they want to get. See, the Second Amendment held these people at bay for 250 years. Really, it did. 250 years, that's a long time for the richest people in the world to go without an aristocracy for 250 years is really saying something. And the reason that we've gone without an aristocracy in this country for 250 years is because of the Second Amendment. Because rich and powerful people can hire people with guns. That's usually how it happens. Or hire them or convince them, as the way Hitler did, and the way that Lenin did with the Cheka. You can always find thugs and barbarians who are perfectly willing to kill somebody or beat them up. And all of this has been going according to plan since we came down from the trees. But the Second Amendment and the Constitution threw a monkey wrench into this, and so they're trying to get us away from all of those ideals because those ideals work. It's not like the Constitution is failing us. That's not what's happening. We're failing the Constitution. That's what's happening. These ideas work. And they raise everybody, which bothers people that want to be at the top. They say a rising tide, incoming tide raises all boats. Okay, well, that's true. But these guys are not in the boats. They're in a hot air balloon, and they don't like the boats getting closer to them. They just want as much distance as possible. They believe in their technology the same way that religious fanatics believe in whatever particular doctrine they have. They believe in their. I believe that the World Economic Forum and guys like Yuval. I believe that they are as convinced that this new immortal body home is not only possible but around the corner. I believe that they have the exact same level of fanatic belief as the Heaven's Gate people did. That flying saucer is just around the corner, and we're just going to get on it, and we're just going to live forever. Super chat from Ken Davis. Here's the thought. Can we get youngsters to read and understand Heinlein or Ayn Rand? There's truly no such thing as a free lunch, but not many libs understand this fact. I think the quick answer to that, Ken, is that no, you're not going to get them to read Ayn Rand or Heinlein, but you can create something that has the same moral foundation that Ayn Rand and Heinlein have laid out. Nobody's going to read Ayn Rand. I can barely read Ayn Rand. She's incandescently brilliant. I don't know how many pages that book is, but if it's 500 pages, it's probably, if it's 1,000 pages, then there are 50 tremendously great pages in Atlas Shrugged. And the rest of it is, so no, they're not going to read it. But that doesn't mean that the ideas are dead. Those ideas can be put into other forms, like the colonies or Major Mace Mattingly or the rest of this stuff, and carried on that way. But back to this guy again, this Yuval guy. These people are materialists. They're 100% materialists. They're 100% atheists, and they are desperately trying to find. This is what the AI thing is all about. They are in a desperate race to create an immortal vessel for their own selves, their own identity, before their biological body fails. That's what I think is really going on. And that's how I think they're planning. I think they're aware of what technology can do. If you've seen some of the things that Boston Robotics can do, you don't need all of these people. You certainly don't need all of these armed people. I just really think they want to live as princes in a world where there is a small staff on the grounds of the manor building, where somebody can put a horseshoe on a horse and fix the cart and farm and bring in the milk and then cook our fabulous dinners, and we just sit there and drink wine and talk about what we're going to do next. That's all they need, is enough to keep them afloat. But I don't think they're reptilian, and that's their big weakness. They really are so blinded by this desire. It's actually kind of funny, because this is exactly what guys like Richard Dawkins accuse, or Bill Maher, or Ricky Gervais, or any of them accuse religious people of being so closed-minded and stuff. It's like they've got their religion, and they got their own commandments and their own everything else. I heard Stephen Fry trying to, talk about how absurd all this stuff is, and so I think that's what they're doing. But what their large scale goals are, I don't know. Maybe the whole illegal alien thing is designed to flood the system, produce enough anarchy in the streets. I know one thing. I lost track of this. The one thing I'm sure they're doing, Chris, clearly sure they're doing, is they're doing everything in their power to make us so crazy that some or one of us or some of us will start doing something violent. And when that happens, they're going to crack down hard. January 6th was I'm not going to say it was a dress rehearsal. That's just all they had, I'm sure that when the Democrats and the people behind the scenes planned January 6th, I'm not saying they planned the date, but when they knew that a bunch of conservatives were going to be coming to the Capitol building angry, there's no other explanation when you see these policemen that have been told not to. No, let them in. By all means, let them in. I think that they thought that on January 6th there was going to be a bunch of guys with ARs over their shoulders, and there's going to be a lot of shooting, and then they'd have a real genuine reason to crack down hard. And all they got was guy in Viking horns and some poor woman who served her country and wanted some answers, and so they had to blow that into the biggest thing they could. But it wasn't much of a coup, and that's not my point. I mean, I'm not the person who said this. I don't remember who did, but somebody said, well, if this was a coup on the part of the armed population of the United States, all the militias and all of the patriots and all of those nutty Second Amendment people have their own, ARs and all the rest of this stuff, then why weren't there any? Okay, so there you go. CP Tome says the Jackass and Horns was and is a professional protester with diagnosed psychiatric issues. So it's a provocation, and they're trying to make it a provocation. When somebody goes to a softball game and says, I want to kill Republicans, that story gets buried. When somebody says something that they hate black people, or they hate this or they hate that, and it suits their narrative, then that is the end of the world, and that will never end. That story. That's the whole George Floyd story, right? It was utter fiction, and they got away with it because there were no body cams. I think the body cams are damn near as important as weapons, not just for the police. I think the body cams are really game changers, because I've mentioned a few times I've become kind of interested in a number of these channels where if they request body cam footage, the police department is required to provide it to anyone who asked for it, as I understand the law. And so all of a sudden now, it's like 20 years of cops condensed now into just a couple weeks. Every single police officer, every single person on every single arrest is recording that arrest from multiple angles. And when these people that are running these YouTube channels find a particularly juicy one, they'll just go get that body cam stuff for that particular arrest or that event, edit it together, and it's some compelling stuff, man. When you see how messed up some of these people are, and how many times in the last 2 months I've heard like Gen Zers saying, well, if you don't be quiet, you're under arrest. You can't arrest me. You don't have the power to arrest me. It's against the law. You're not allowed to arrest me. I know my rights. And they're just like, fool around and find out. And so that's what they do. They fool around and they find out. And then they start kicking the inside of the car and screaming at the top of their lungs and crying for mom and demanding their phone and cursing out these police officers who I think are being not only professional, but too professional, too nice, too accommodating. I think it's great that the police is nice and accommodating and polite, but I think after the second or third time somebody says, no, you're not going to do this, I think you've convinced me that you made your best effort. You don't have to do that 13 times. There was one of these cases where a person was trespassing in the rental office of their apartment building, and this whole thing was covered on body cam, and they wanted this, I think it was this woman, to leave. And she kept arguing about it, and the policeman kept saying, ma'am, I'm practically begging you, please just walk out that door. We don't want to arrest you, but we will if you don't walk out that door. And they're talking with her, and she just keeps, well, I just came to get my keys, and she's drunk and all. I came to get my keys, and I'm not allowed to check my mail. This guy, ma'am. And so finally the cop says, ma'am, I've warned you 13 times. I've been counting now, 13 times. If you keep this up, we have to arrest you. So then finally she keeps it up, then they arrest him. And I'm thinking, I think 13 times, I think 13 warnings, officers, actually not helping your case. I honestly think, 3 times would do it. But the reason these body cam things are so important was because you can't have a George Floyd incident with body cams. They can't do it. They can make an assertion that this policeman behaved in such a way or whatever, but they can't beat the evidence of the police saying, here it is from 4 different angles. Here's the interaction. They swung at me first. This guy pulled a gun, whatever. There's a number of cases that have happened since Floyd that could have been turned into Floyd too, except that there was video evidence of what actually happened, and they don't have the ability to do that yet. So anyway, Chris, I think when people say, well, what should we be doing? We should be training ourselves to look at areas where we don't think there's a threat. That's where it's going to come from. We got to start training ourselves to start thinking about things that seemingly have no potential impact, things like just a regular commercial airline flight, for example. We were ready for incoming Russian or Soviet bombers. We were ready, more than prepared for 60 backfire bombers coming over the North Pole. What we weren't prepared for was a American flight, whatever it was. And so now we presumably try to plug that hole too. Epic Guess, what a cool name. They want no consequences, no guilt, no correction ever. Correct. Death is God's judgment they can't avoid, so they hate anything that reminds them of it. That is the sickness, to be like God. 100%. Yes, that's it. That's what really drives them. All of them, including Keshwa. That's probably their primary. It's funny, I didn't really think of it as a motivation, but it really is. Probably the best single explanation, honestly, Epic, is these people think that they're gods. They think that they have not only the ability, but the right and the obligation to tell all of us what to do. We're all NPCs in their little video game, and this business of artificial intelligence it's the Tower of Babel. It's humans saying we are gods now. We are gods, and we will create life, and we'll create life better than what that bearded loser did with with biology. We're gonna, what he made, namely us, we're gonna leave that in the dust. They're going to be made out of titanium, and we're going to have a nuclear power plant in them, and they'll be able to survive in outer space and walk across the entire ocean underwater and all blah, 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 live forever. Blah, 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 blah. I see no sign of this happening at all. So anyway, there you go. Let's go back to questions, and I'm getting a little hoarse. We did 4 hours last time, which is kind of shocking. 1:30 here. So let's see what we got. We got Dave Wilson. We got Eric Blake again. I think we might do that, and I think maybe because I still have show to edit and post and all the rest of it. All right, so here we go. From Dave Wilson. Hey, hooray for Dave. Hey, Bill, before I begin, I'd like to point out that the Psyche asteroid mission is set to ascend to the heavens upon a thundering Falcon Heavy on October 5th at 7:38 a.m. your time. Will the right angle crew be doing live stream duty, or are you keeping your powder dry for Starship launch, hopefully later that month? I think I'm happy to say, Dave, happy, very happy. I'm genuinely pleased to be able to say that launch of a Falcon Heavy is moderately interesting to me now, because we know that thing works. If I'm aware of it, I'll certainly watch it. If it's, I don't think we'll live stream it. We will certainly live stream the next Starship flight. And you see that Starship on that new pad, and that pad is so high. It's just, for those of you who are real space geeks, during the Apollo program, obviously the Saturn V's did the heavy lifting. You had to have a Saturn V to get to the moon. But if you just wanted to get into Earth orbit with a command module or command service module, you didn't have to burn a Saturn V to do that. You could do that with a rocket that's about half the size in terms of length, called a Saturn 1B. It's essentially a bunch of redstone rockets strapped together. But the Saturn 1B is a really cool looking little rocket. And since they had to launch out of pads 39A and B, when you launched a Saturn 1B, they launched it on what looked like a bar stool that goes about halfway up, and it's kind of sad. That was the last launch. That was the last launch I actually saw at the Kennedy Space Center. I saw the shuttle from Gainesville several times, but I was from Gainesville, it's from 100 miles away. But the last time I saw, the last rocket I saw, the last Apollo hardware I saw launched, and I'm virtually positive the last launch of the Apollo series was Saturn 1B. I genuinely do not remember whether Apollo Soyuz came before Skylab or after. I just don't remember. But whatever it was, I saw Saturn 1B. Anyway, this new stand that they have for Starship reminds me so much of that. Wow, that thing is up high, man. That's just even more impressive. And then I realized, well, last time you did it, the damn rocket, yeah, I thought so too. Soyuz, Apollo, CP Tome says Apollo Soyuz was before Skylab. So I saw the last of the 3 Skylab missions take off. Skylab itself went up on a Saturn V in one piece, which was pretty impressive. That one Saturn V, by the way, with the Skylab that doesn't have the tapering that the Apollo does. It just looks like a 50 caliber bullet. That one Skylab Saturn V is just awesome. Anyway, so you see the Starship up that high, and it's like, man, that's a lot of room. Yeah, well, it's because last time they turned this thing on, it blew the ground up. It just blew up the ground and kicked all of the dirt and concrete chips back up into the engines. So if you're going to have a failure, that's the kind of failure I'd want to have, Well, we built this thing out of reinforced concrete to withstand the most powerful rocket engine ever made, and we lit that candle, and it turned out that the most powerful rocket ever made destroyed what we thought was hard enough and solid enough to launch the most powerful rocket ever made. If you're going to fail, that's how you want to fail, in my opinion. All right, so we won't be doing that. Now to business. It seems that pointing out hypocrisy and deception on the part of the left is useless. Indeed, they seem to revel in getting away with it. Should we refocus our efforts on pointing out what they want is usually stupid, evil, and or both. After all, they are. It's one of the things I talked about. C.P. Tome said, in chunks of concrete, hundreds of yards, destroying minivans in parking lots beyond what was thought minimum safe distance. Cool. We got a question like this yesterday. It's been internally, it's been happening with me for a couple years now, maybe even a little longer, but now it's pretty much set. I think any effort at prevention is wasted effort. There's no preventing this. And one of the things about this fourth turning is, even though it's hard to accept, not only can you not prevent it, but you shouldn't. So if we're going to spend our energy on arguing with these people, that's just wasted energy. So what do we spend our energy on? I think we move from prevention to preservation. That's my opinion. We concentrate on preservation, protection. I started that talk yesterday by saying the Republican Party better get its act together, better come up with a brand, and better come up with a logo better than this horrific thing that we've got now, because we're going to start seeing a lot of people coming our way, and we need to buff up this place so that when we have new visitors here, it doesn't look like Aunt Marty's living room with the vinyl covers on all the furniture. It's got to look like a comfortable place for people. We gotta buff up this message, this image, and make it cool again. And so that's what I would do rather than argue with liberals and try and change their minds. We can't change their minds. The only thing that's going to change their mind, they say conservative is a liberal who's been mugged. And what's happening right now, you're seeing it all the time, it's all over YouTube, is that liberals are being literally mugged by muggers in places like New York City and San Francisco. And they know that the people that they voted for are the ones that have allowed this to happen. And right now they're going through that cognitive dissonance where they're saying, why doesn't somebody do something about all this crime? Oh, wait, I voted for the guy who said that they wanted to abolish the police. So maybe that was a mistake on my part. So we need to make that a lot more attractive out on the street. Better signage and all the rest of it. Also, if I was going to run a campaign for the Republicans, ad campaign to just get Donald Trump over the line, I would go to a voting booth and I'd have an envelope and I'd say, what's interesting about the vote that's coming up in 2024? It's secret. You see this curtain here? That's why it's there. So you can vote for less crime. You can vote for better schools. You can vote for no international wars or conflicts. You can vote for a roaring economy. You can vote for all of those things. And since you do that behind the curtain, you can come out, open that curtain, and say, Donald Trump is the biggest, nastiest, fat fascist I've ever seen in my life, and it was a pleasure voting against him. Ain't nobody going to know but you. We're not going to tell a soul. We zip. I'm really serious. I was saying, yeah, you don't have to like Trump. There's a lot about Trump that the people who love Trump don't like. But we're not going to... You don't have to come out of the voting booth with a Trump sign. You can come out of the voting booth saying, I'm so happy I voted against that son of a bitch. That's why it's secret. Here we go. A super chat from DJ CJ. I'm not sure Starbase will be a viable place to develop Starship anymore. Any thoughts on how long it will take for Elon to move ops to the Cape and why all the government roadblocks down in Boca anyway? The problem is moving from Texas to Florida is not moving away from the FAA or NASA. Can't believe I'm saying this about NASA, but this has been 30 years of coming to grips with this. As I think I said on Monday, I think it was Monday, I would not be surprised. I'd be disappointed, but I would not be surprised if he has to take SpaceX out of America, if he has to take it to some third world country because there's relative freedom there. I think that would be awful, but it may be necessary. Elon wants to get to Mars, and Elon's the kind of guy that makes every single day count. And so this has got to be driving him a special species of mad. 3 years ago we were talking about translunar missions, high orbit missions with Dragon capsule or the Starship, and as far as I can tell, it's not like we're waiting for Elon. It's like Elon is waiting for permission. And if he were to buy a place, like if he were to buy a country, sovereign country, I'd move there. I'd move to Musklandia. But we'll see. And final question from Eric Blake again. Hey, Bill, any thoughts on Ray Epps? Is he getting only slaps on the wrist because he's a Fed, or because, as Tim Poole suspect, he's a rat who's sung like a bird to the Feds to avoid jail time? Must investigate further. I don't know anything about Ray Epps at all. Nothing. I got nothing to say about America. I just don't know a thing about it. And that's just the honest truth. So, since we got shorted on that, we'll do one more that I saw in the comment section, and that's the stuff with Russell Brand. Russell Brand, I despised him. I really did. I thought there was something about this guy that just drives me completely insane. And then all of a sudden he got red pilled and started talking about freedom, and now he's asking some pretty interesting questions. That's one thing, but Brand brought with him a serious audience, and he's getting millions of views now, and he's been going at this fairly fearlessly. And so now all of a sudden here's this guy who's criticizing COVID, criticizing World Economic Forum, criticizing climate change, criticizing the Democrats, criticizing everything, and now all of a sudden there's these charges against this guy. This is my feeling about the charges towards Trump too. It's like it's taken you 4 years to dig up this arcane stuff. So look, I don't know. I don't even know really what the charges are. I'm sure it's inappropriate, sexual behavior or something. Like, first of all, I don't look to Russell Brand, especially young Russell Brand, as a beacon of morality. It's not. I'm not. If it turns out that Russell Brand, came home and was sleeping with 7 beautiful ladies on a giant pile of money, I wouldn't get the vapors and fall out of my chair. It wouldn't surprise me the slightest. What surprises me is that he's not doing that. So it looks to me like a hit piece, and I don't know what. It's rape charges now. Yeah. So CP Tome says someone pops up with rape charges. Hell, it almost worked against Kavanaugh. It surely did. I've forgotten how awful that was. Brandt can't have as much defensive support, right? Let's take him out. Yeah, I think that's what they're trying to do. Yeah, Brand he's actually really interesting, and he's really good at it, and he's got a tremendous following, and he's in the major leagues now. So to me, going after Russell Brand is just more evidence that you people who were silent and operating effectively for the longest time are so worried now that you're saying the quiet part out loud. What a convenient timing. And I don't know who made these charges, but I'll tell you one thing. The first thing I would want to see in the interest of fairness, is I would want to see a contemporary police report filed by this person. That's the first thing I'd want to see. Um, because otherwise, it's just, yeah, he he did this. Time to cancel him. This was it Blasey Ford or whatever her name was with Kavanaugh. She's just gone back into the woodwork from when she came, but she should be in prison for perjury number one and helping to destroy this guy's life. There's no consequences. These Biden appointees go to Congress and they ask them, well, this is your responsibility. Why didn't you do this? I don't have the answer for that right now, Senator, but we'll get back to you on that as soon as we can. I'll have my staff get back to you. How many times have I heard this in the last year? And they come in and look. Do you believe that there's a difference between men or women? Well, I believe that the educational no. It's a simple yes or no question. Do you believe that there's a difference between men and women? Our society has created just dancing around with them, and it's like, can somebody please bang a gavel and say, you are here under oath. You will either answer the question yes or no, or you'll be cited for contempt of Congress and you'll get a criminal record. Maybe we'll send you to jail. Who knows? And that never happens. And all of these body cam arrests I told you about, all these spoiled brats and all of these entitled, Zoomers and people telling the police that they can't do this, or you can't arrest me, or, I'm going to call my mom. Where's my phone? That kind of thing. And you think finally they got reality caught up with them and consequences caught up with them, and you find out that they had felony assault charges against an officer, and the judge says charges dismissed, paid a $600 fine, that kind of thing. That is enough to make you ill. So, yeah, that's that. But people who make these accusations years afterwards, you really have to ask yourself, Eric, talking about saying the quiet part out loud, Eric said, remember when cops had batons? I miss those days. Yeah, now, and I'm not talking about the police batons either. I'm talking about that kind of Irish cop with that little wooden sort of billy club thing you'd have on a little leather thing around his waist, around his wrist, and you just kind of swing it around, just walk up and down the street, swing, 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 swing. It's like, hey, here I am. Everybody behaving themselves good, because I don't want to have to crack anybody on the head with this little stick I'm carrying. But it's like they get, they make a loud enough noise and they get off. They get set free. So there you go. All right, I'm going to call this one. And we are looking at, 1 hour and 47 minutes. By the time I finish this up, it'll be about 1 hour and 50 minutes. I'll call that the minimum viable product to avoid lawsuit. I think that's a fair thing to do so. I've still got some editing to do. So I think at this point we will say goodnight, trying to get all this stuff back there worked out, and we'll see. But it'll be soon, and until then, this show is made possible by the members at BillWhittle.com who continue to pay the bills here and keep this little show of ours going and keep these ideas moving and all the rest of it. So thank you to all of the members, and thank you to the rest of you low-life, slacker, parasitical freeloaders and gold brickers. We love you all. We love you all, everyone. So anyway, thanks for being here. So we'll say goodnight to the YouTube people first, because we said hello to them first. So YouTube, thanks for joining us, and we are out of here.